So, I don't know, some of you certainly know him, but Graham, been GUE instructor for forever, I think.
Don't hold that against me.
Obviously, he regularly, to keep his certification, regularly has to dive to silly depths that most of us will never attain. And Malin Head being sort of on the deeper side of things, certainly somewhere that I know me and Carl really want to go to. So I'm sure once you've seen some of his pictures and a bit of that talk about this, that you're going to want to, some of you are going to want to do it as well. But enjoy.
Thank you. Fun. Well, thank you for making the effort coming out on a lovely February evening. It's nice to be able to do this sort of thing again after quite some time, isn't it? So, yeah, I'd like to talk to you about Malin Head, show you some cool shots of the wrecks there, and try and convince you that it's not actually worth travelling overseas, although nominally it is a different country, but it's not actually worth travelling halfway around the world to like Truck Lagoon or something like that. We do have the world's best wreck diving, I think, in the world, so we can certainly celebrate that, and it's not too difficult to get to. So, where is Malin Head? Actually, Malin Head is in Ireland proper. It is the northernmost point of Ireland, the island. That's a lot of things in there. Era, or Southern Ireland, but it's actually the county of Donegal wraps around Northern Ireland and extends a bit further north there. So the diving's called Malin Head because of that northerly point, but you can imagine in the First and Second World War there was quite a lot of traffic into Liverpool and backwards and forwards, so the U-boats used to sit out here and wait for the stuff coming across from America all the way across the North Atlantic or leaving, and they could just pick them off as they were coming to and fro there. So it's a really interesting place to go diving for a number of reasons, and I'll show you some of the wrecks, but you know, the maritime history is rich. But what's really interesting about it is it's basically oceanic water. So you can expect phenomenal visibility, which is really nice actually. And not only oceanic water, the bottom is pebbles and shale, as opposed to silt that you would often find, like where we are down here. A lot of the bottom is quite soft, right? You touch the bottom, it goes up there. But there, everything's supersized. So here, the bottom might be very fine particles like silt, but up there, the bottom is like egg-sized pebbles and stuff like that. So at the moment, I talked to the skipper actually earlier this week for this year's bookings, but he was saying that they had about 9-10 metre swells earlier this week. So it's quite oceanic out there. And if you lose the boat, the next stop in a westerly direction is America, so make sure you bring your passport. But it could be a long swim, 3,000 miles or something like that. If you veer a little bit north, you might hit Iceland or something like that, but that's probably like 700-800 miles. So it's quite remote diving, and you know, that sort of adds to the appeal somewhat, I would say. Long days on boats, big seas, but fantastic visibility. So it's really brilliant, I would say. Relatively easy to get to. There's a number of ferries going all the way up the western coast of the UK. So Stranraer, like Birkenhead, Anglesey, and there's other ones that go along. So you can hop across to Ireland and then drive up to Letterkenny is the biggest town near where the ship goes from. In actual fact, it's quite amusing, although the boat is moored in Fanny Bay, so perhaps it shouldn't be called Malin Head, it should be called Fanny Bay diving, but I'm not sure it would have quite the same appeal as Malin Head.
Some of us have dived the Fanny, though, Graham.
There you go.
I remember it well,
I think we'll. So I said there were lots of good reasons to go to Ireland, and there's 2 very good reasons to go to Ireland, right? And it really does taste different. If you've never been to Ireland, it really does taste very different, and it's quite a nice way to wind down after a day's diving, a pint or 2 of Guinness. So when we talk about Malin Head, with thinking about wrecks, but actually and visibility, but there's plenty of fish life as well on these wrecks, so you don't get the tropical blues and bright oranges and stuff like that. You can see the brown one there, and there's a different brown one there. There's probably a different brown one there, but you know, all the stuff that you'd expect to see in the English Channel, really pouting, whiting, cod, ling, all that sort of stuff. But what we can see is some quite nice visibility. You're going to be doing decompression if you go out there, so don't sort of pay too much attention to the numbers here, but unfortunately that's the price to pay. The shallowest wreck is actually the one that I'll show you first, is in around 39-40 metres of water. The deepest one I've dived out there has been nearly 150 metres of water, but to do the classics, which I'll talk about, you're kind of in the 50 to 70 metre range. So we'll have a look at the classics and talk about that. But yeah, you do have quite a bit of time hanging around in mid-water. So that's just something to bear in mind. But I'm guessing that you've done a bit of decompression maybe here on the south coast, and then some of you may be working towards it. It's not impossible. It may be a level up from where you are at the moment, but it's only practice and knowledge, and then you can get there and enjoy the diving. So the first wreck I'd talk about is the Laurentic. Anywhere else in the world, this would be an amazing wreck. It just has the misfortune of being in Malin Head, so it's the wreck that you do on the bad weather days. It's the closest to shore, and it's in around 40 metres of water, and if I remember correctly, it's about 5 or 7 miles offshore, and the water's quite green there, although you usually get pretty good visibility, like 20 to 30 metres of viz. But it kind of feels like a bit of a letdown when I show you the next things. The nice things about the Laurentic is it had 2 guns, and one of the guns has been pulled up and is on the shore in Downing. So you can see the gun on the shore. You can go and have lunch at one of the pubs there on the seafront, or dinner. Go and have a look at the gun, read a little bit about the history of the wreck, have a look at the gun, and then the next day you can go and look at the gun underwater. So that's quite nice. I think the local council, they raised the first gun, salvaged the first gun. They wanted to take the second, and I think the 2 skippers working in the area made it very clear that if any attempts were made to salvage the second gun, it wouldn't be met with some considerable force. And I think people were talking about the Irish fishermen. There was a little altercation, and the Irish fishermen got their way and scared the people away. I can't actually remember, but you're always reading about it in the news. And someone did suggest that they might send some Irish fishermen to the Ukraine and sort the situation out over there. So you can sort of think about the resistance that Donald and Michael actually had to raising the gun. So that's one of the features of this wreck, the Laurentic. But it's a huge vessel, nearly 200 metres long in about 40 metres of water. And it almost feels like a little recreational dive after you've been doing like sub 100 metre stuff, and then you come back to 40 metres and just one tank, just jump in, swim around for an hour, 20 minutes of deco, easy peasy. But fantastic dive. That's one of my mates from China, and here they are exploring the bow. So you often wonder, like, why is it the bow is often the bit that's left from a wreck? Well, of course, the bow is like smashing into the weather the whole time the ship is underway, so the bow is typically pretty well reinforced, and that's why you can often find the bow relatively intact, whereas the rest of the ship might have actually folded in, or the panels have collapsed in on themselves. Obviously warships are a little bit different. We'll have a look at some warships. but usually when you talk about passenger liners that have been converted to military service, you can usually find the bow on them because it's one of the heaviest parts of the boats. And I know I'm teaching a lot of you to suck eggs, but some people are not really aware of this stuff. I mean, I love diving with people who know their ways around wrecks, and you can really make yourself sound intelligent. Oh, look at the triple expansion engine and things like that. And you know, it's brilliant when you do dive with someone like that, because you get back to the surface and they'll tell you, you know, what you were actually looking at, and then you'll say like that way, and they're like, no. Oh, okay. All right, we'll go back that way, and then usually, right, I've got a hopeless sense of direction. One of the nice things about the Laurentic, it's got a little bit of history about it. So it has been heavily salvaged. It was carrying precious metals, and there are still 6 or 7 ingots of gold missing. So everybody's got this hope that they dive on the Laurentic and able to retire. So yeah, exactly. So who knows if it's actually been found and stuck in someone's pocket and the new house goes up accordingly, or whether they're actually on the wreck. But you know,
trying to fill your next trip?
Sorry?
Are you trying to fill your next
trip?
trip?
Yeah, exactly. Come to the Laurentic and you could retire after that.
Is that shiny thing down there?
Yeah, exactly. You can see just in there. So again, that's my Chinese friend looking around here. So they were quite excited about the thought of searching for gold. And being Chinese, they're quite excited about other things on a dive as well. So they miss all the stuff like, you know, there's winches and what have you going on around there, and he's trying to do battle with a crab, which may or may not have lost that battle and ended up stir-fried that evening. In fact, the Chinese are fantastic to go on a trip like this, because you never fail to eat well. They're obsessed with food. And you know, we travel halfway around Ireland to go to specific restaurants. They usually have an itinerary already set up for you on a trip of where they want to go for dinner every night and things like that. And the only way you can break that is by letting them catch a crab or a lobster, and then we have to eat that evening. So that sort of saves you a 50-mile journey for dinner or something. So quite interesting. All right, so we talk about like warships, and if you've been around for a while, and I know some of you have been around tech diving in the UK for a while, this is a famous one, and a guy called Lee Bishop, who you may or may not have heard of, back in the 90s, I think it was the 90s or the early 2000s, he's really like pioneering getting these kind of shots. The guns of this boat, this is the Audacious, which is a King George V battleship, and I think they're 13.5 inches. There are 2 other King George V battleships, which were like version 2, which is the Repulse and the Prince of Wales. I've also been lucky enough to dive those, and their guns were a little bit bigger, and I think some of the Japanese destroyers, some of their guns were in the same sort of size. But this is pretty much as big as it gets when you talk about guns. And I love it when people show a picture of like a machine gun on a wreck or something, and you, bah! No, that's a gun. It's a little bit like Crocodile Mick pulling his knife out, right? That's not a knife, this is a knife. Yeah, 13.5-inch guns. But Lee sort of was taking pictures like this, and this is almost the shot that Lee took in black and white with a film camera. So we're quite lucky with digital cameras. They're a lot more light sensitive, and you get a lot more goes at the picture. You don't get like 24 shots, so you can just have a shotgun approach, and you just like wiggle the camera around, just keep pressing the button, and hopefully like 1 or 2 of them will almost turn out presentable.
How deep's that, Graham? Sorry.
Say again?
How deep's that?
That is about 57, 60 metres. So actually this is the barbette, and I can't remember which turret it was. I think it was B turret, but basically I had 2 of these big guns and turrets on the front of the boat, and they're actually, contrary to what you might think, just held in with gravity. So they're just like dropped into the hole, and the barbette is the turret, so you can see the turret here of the gun. They're actually just dropped in the hole where they sit, and
It's the same
gravity
tanks.
holds them down.
Yeah, a lot of tanks.
Oh really?
Thing,
The
yeah.
the turrets on tanks
Yeah.
are the same thing. So it's quite surprising. You think there was a massive bolt and accordingly a massive wrench to put them in. No, they just drop them in, and that goodness knows how many tons it weighs, but it's enough to sit there and be completely stable. Until of course you get shot by a submarine, and then your magazine goes pop and you blow off the entire front third of the boat. Ship, not really sure on the difference, but floaty thing in the water, right? It's blown, the front third's blown off, and the barbette has come off and tipped over, is now resting upside down on the bottom, and you can kind of see it there. So it's kind of interesting, and again, it's nice to hear the stories of what you're seeing underwater, of what it actually is and how it's working. And the main boat sort of lies at this angle, and then the front's lying perpendicular to that. And more or less what's left of the bow, I don't think I put a shot of it in here, but more or less what's left of the bow is something about the size of a rowing boat. So you can imagine this vast, nearly 200-metre wreck, and a third of it, so about 60 metres, being blown to smithereens. The barbette survives because it's heavily armoured. It's got to be armoured to take firing these shells, and the shells are about the size of me, so half a ton or whatever they weighed. And you can imagine them like firing those out in rapid succession. It takes a fair amount of energy. Yeah, and then the 60 metres is turned into bits of fragmented metal, and then there's a tiny little sharp bit, the little rowing bit, the very front of the bow, on the seabed, which is quite sort of amazing to think of the energy that sort of caused that.
Bigger version of our Valentine tank.
Yeah.
Just slightly bigger.
Yeah, and then if you look at that, that's like a retake of Lee's shot, or sort of like a modern day adaptation of it. And what I did, it's actually more work than you'd expect. So it's nearly 60 metres. It's trying to get two divers that are autonomous with minds of their own. So you talk to them and you kind of explain what you're trying to do. But there's actually a light in each of the barrels. There's a light up here to bring a bit of depth to the shot. There's a light in there to pick up the middle of the two guns, and then the two divers have got lights. So there's about five lights to get that shot, which is quite a lot of work actually, as you can imagine. But I was quite happy with how that one turned out.
Good job training the Congas to hold the strobe.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, last year when I went back, I tried to do a bit more simple photography as opposed to like having all these lights down there. I think I almost gave myself decompression sickness in Italy at 100 metres, swimming these strobes around, trying to place them around the wreck to take this shot. So it does take some effort, and if you want to see the master of underwater photography or underwater wreck photography, there's a guy called Alex Dawson. You can find him on Facebook or on Instagram if you're that way inclined. Probably speaking double Dutch to Kev, but some of the younger people in the audience might know what I'm talking about. But yeah, check out Alex Dawson. He's just got some amazing shots where he's got these big aquascapes, for want of another word, and sort of remotely lit, so it's really nice.
Did you pre-plan how you were going to do that?
Yeah, and the first shot of the guns was the first trip I did here, and this is like the second trip. So I knew exactly what I wanted to do, and because of that, we were able to achieve the shot. And the nice thing about this, it was like a millionaire's dive. Because it was the end of a 2-week trip, and a lot of people had like run out of steam, which you do like 13-14 days of 70-metre average diving. It takes the wind out of yourselves a little bit, I can tell you. And then people had to get home for various reasons. So on that day we had a big charter boat, and it's probably twice the size of Rocket, for example. a big cat with the gearing up area is probably the size of this area that you're all sat in, with 3 divers on, and then we had the captain and a deckhand, and then we had this amazing World War One wreck for us to be able to dive. All to ourselves. It was just, like I said, like a millionaire's diving. And if you were seriously wealthy and that was your thing, that's probably what you'd end up doing, like chartering a whole boat or having your own boat on the site and being able to dive enormous wrecks like this without it being crawling with other divers. And it does really fuck up, excuse my French, it does really fuck up your photos when some idiot comes through with their light, like swimming through, like dancing on the bottom and stuff like that. And then your lighting guys lose their attention and start going off other ways. So it's like herding cats, I would say. And
do you get many issues with other dive boats dropping in on the site you're planning?
there's only 2 boats that operate in that area.
Oh, cool.
For I think the first few trips that went out there, they actually used to board in Stranraer or maybe even Liverpool. And I think Al Wright used to do this on, is it Solitaire? Or
Yeah.
I think that was the boat. I think they did quite a lot of the early stuff in Malin Head. Al Wright's actually now down in Portland, I think.
He's based in
Yeah.
Portland.
But
yeah.
he is Irish.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's,
He's
you know.
out there today.
Oh, really? There you go.
Yeah, he's not in Malin Head though.
No. But yeah, so he did a lot of the stuff, liverboard. But for me, I think that's the worst way that you could do this kind of diving, because you're taking a slow boat from UK across to Ireland, like take 2 days to get there. Whereas if you take the ferry, it takes like 4 hours, and then it's 2 hours drive on the other side. So you can make it easily from Dorset, Hampshire, in a day, not a hard day either, so it's 4 or 5 hours to get to Anglesey or Birkenhead or Stranraer, wherever you're going from. A few hours on the ferry and then a couple of hours the other side, so it's a day's travel punctuated by a nice rest on the ferry. And usually I try and take a slow ferry overnight, so you get on board, have something to eat, a few beers, fall asleep for like 10 hours, and then wake up at 6 in the morning, drive off the ferry, get to the dive centre, load the boat and go diving on that day. So that's pretty cool. So Audacious, that's the back end of the boat, and you can see it's got a rear facing torpedo on the back of the boat, which is quite interesting. And you can see the steery things poking up there, but it kind of looks like a little mouse there on the bottom, right, with the rudders poking up. And actually, this is, all the wrecks are deteriorating over time. The effects of massive winter storms and 100 years of being in salt water, the wrecks are starting to collapse. And a bit back from here, you can't really see it, but some of the prop shafts used to like stick up in that angle, they're now collapsed down on the bottom. So it's quite interesting to see how the wrecks are changing over the couple of years that I've been diving. And if you go back like 20 years when the first guys were pioneering this stuff, and you can see how intact the boats were, it is quite an interesting story. So big ships, big engines, so those are the boilers, and I think, no, this is not the Audacious, this is the Empire Heritage, which is famous for another reason, which you'll see in a minute, but they're vast, and if I'm right, I think there's 6 boilers on the Empire Heritage of these enormous sizes, so vast steam-powered ships and vast amounts of engineering, and hugely interesting for people who are into like maritime architecture and things like that. And well, I mean all divers, because it's just brilliant, because that's like 30-40 metres of visibility. This is the UK, just to remind you, you haven't had to get on a plane and go somewhere exotic. It's really our domestic diving, I would say. Big engines, big ships, massive props, and you can see it there, like one of the blades of this propeller just dwarfing a diver, so they're sort of meters each blade in size, and sort of 5 meters across in in diameter. I mean, it's vast ships and built for war. It's a little bit scary, really, and maybe that's timely for us to think about at the moment. And then for the fish lovers, this little polyp there. And then this is what the Empire Heritage is famous for. So that's in nearly 70 metres of water, and that's almost ambient light. So the divers, 2 dive lights, well, they're carrying video lights, which give a nice throw, as opposed to a normal dive light, which is quite a focused sort of beam. They give quite a nice throw, and it picks out some of the details of this tank. And I think that's a Sherman tank, although there are others on that dive. And it's really like a lad has just scattered his toys across his bedroom floor. You know, all the tanks and you know, soldier toys and stuff just scattered there on the bottom. Only it's super sized. You know, it's the size of a tank, sort of a massive car sort of size thing, and it's just brilliant. And then you dropping into the water, come down to about 20 metres, and you can see it just start to appear out of the gloom in front of you. It's just amazing, and you're just like a dog with 2 tails, like going everywhere on these wrecks, just trying to look at everything. And I've probably done like 5 or 6 dives on this wreck, and I would happily do another 20, 30 dives. Just can't get bored of this kind of dive and the details. And you know, the first dive, you just can't believe it. You're just looking everywhere at the big scale, and then as you get more into it, you see more and more small details and more of the story, which is pretty cool. So, you know, you just see like the tank almost looks like it's ready to drive onto the beach or for D-Day or whatever. I think this is a World War II wreck. I don't think there were tanks in World War I, were there? Yeah, I can't remember. I'm not. But I think this is
This would be Second World War.
1930s, late 1930s, 1940s. So yeah, whereas the Audacious is World War One. So 2 world wars there, and then like other war-y type things, like you can see the tyres. They're almost good enough to get out and stick on my truck. So if anybody's motivated, you certainly could probably find the condition of them. But they're just lying there on the bottom, sort of 20 or 30 of these vehicles that was being carried by the Empire Heritage, sort of scattered around on the bottom. So I mean, it's just it's really cool to be swimming around in that that colour of water as well. You know, typically we talk about sort of green water diving in the UK, but usually out there it's blue water diving. And interestingly enough, I tend to go in August, and they say that August is not the best month. July tends to be quite a good one, because all the algae blooms in the spring, and then it dies off, and then it picks up again towards the end of exactly what happens here. But you know, for them, bad visibility can be 50 metres. They're used to some other stuff, and I'll show you like the best viz I've had out there. They also have subs, so subs are usually pretty uninteresting, but when you can sort of get away from the thing and take in the whole sub, it's quite fascinating. So there's a nice little gun there on the top of the sub. You can see the outside of the sub. There's nothing to them at all. They're almost like made of paper. So obviously that falls off, and then you see like the reinforcing the framework of the submarine there. So I think that's the U-89, and that one is in about 57 metres of water on sort of a sandy bottom. So it almost like jumps out at you. It's just amazing, and lucky to dive them. I know submariners get upset when you call it a conning tower, but I think that is actually a conning tower. I think later on they become fins, but at that time it was actually a conning tower. So if you're a submariner and I'm wrong, I'm sorry, But you say conning tower, everybody knows what you're talking about, right? So conning tower, and again, the sort of condition of some of this stuff is amazing, and you can see it like intact on the bottom. A lot of the wrecks we get out here are a little bit shallower, and they get smashed, and they get trawled, and they get salvaged by companies and individual divers, whereas there's a lot less diving in Ireland. There's a lot less people, so the wrecks tend to be in better condition, and they're deeper. So although they have these massive seas, they tend to be protected by the depth themselves. And here we are at the back end. So the gun was pointing forward, and that's the remnants of the rudder. So submarines, the rudders go up and rudder, the steery bit goes like that as opposed to like that on a normal boat, because of course a submarine is working in 3 dimensions, whereas a boat comes around on the top, and you can't actually see, but that is the blade of the prop. So a submarine that's like maybe 60 meters long with a prop that's like that, it's quite surprising. But of course submarines, it's more about stealth than speed, so they don't need the massive propellers that often some of the surface ships have. And then we can see the door down on the rear facing torpedo there, so you can imagine the door coming up and a torpedo shooting out. So even me, with my lack of like maritime architecture, I can see some of this cool stuff going on underwater, so that makes it quite nice as well. So then this is a famous bow. This is the Justicia. So it's a White Star liner, again a vast ship, like 220 meters long, which is just incredible. And this is sort of, I put this in to sort of show the evolution of photos. This is pretty normal if you're working with divers as models. So you get into position where you want to take the shot, you look up and they fucked off around the corner, right, looking at something else. So it takes quite a lot of training and patience to work with other divers on this stuff, particularly I think like that's an English guy, but that's a Chinese guy, and you know he speaks excellent English, but of course he's only getting 80% of what you're saying, and he's also interested in enjoying his own dive. So it's quite common to see people, you frame the shot and then they disappear, but sometimes you almost get it right. So this is they've kind of started to move away from where I wanted to take the shot, and they're turning around and coming back, but that's about 72 meters there in the bottom of the Scour, and 67, 65 meter average dive, average depth for this dive. So you can almost see the railings there at the top. You can do the old Titanic thing, but absolutely amazing. And last year when I went back, this panel is actually folded out, so the bow's got about a third smaller.
What's that laying on the side now on the seabed?
This here,
Yeah,
yeah, that's just one of the panels that's just like unfolded from the wreck. So it's quite funny because, you know, just out of the visibility or the ability of the camera to pick stuff up, the wreck's almost like unfolded, you know, and you've got the bow intact, and the stern, you can see the props and stuff, which I'll show you in a minute, but the middle of the boat is actually collapsed in on itself. Interestingly enough, on this, the telegraph is still in place, so you can see the telegraph, because it's held in place by a massive beam, and no one's had the wherewithal to be able to cut it out, although I'm sure every Irish tech diver's had a little shake of it to see whether they can dislodge it. And soon it will, you know, the beam, something will move and it will be gone forever, which is a little bit of a shame, but I mean, I guess that's diving per se.
Have they not been salvaged at all commercially?
Some of them have, but often no, not really.
A bit deep for the commercial zone.
It's not commercial. I mean, Bibby back in the 40s and 30s, they salvaged ships with cranes and things, and they actually managed to pull a ship literally to pieces to get what they wanted.
Yeah, they can salvage them with grabs as well. So
Yeah.
they drop a grab down and smash it out of the way.
And they
and
just
stuff like that.
they literally pulled ships apart to get what they want, and they were very efficient at it. There's a guy called Ray Ives. I don't know if you know him. He's on Facebook. Ray Ives Museum. Ray Ives Diver, and he worked for Bibby back in the day as a diver. But before then, they salvaged ships. He spent his life. The guy's about 80, 85 and still diving.
That's pretty cool, right?
The guy's a legend. He has got his own museum. If you're ever in Plymouth, look at Ray Ives Museum. But yeah, he worked for Bibby, salvaging stuff all around the world. Look him up on the internet. He's
Interestingly enough, we talked about King George V battleships, and the Repulse and the Prince of Wales have gone. They've been salvaged, and the reason is that these are pre-nuclear. They were, the hulls were laid down before there was nuclear testing.
First nuclear explosion.
Yeah, so all the steel has no nuclear signature, and is very valuable for medical and scientific instrumentation because of the lack of
that's why they salvage Scapa Flow.
Yeah, exactly. So you talk about the Prince of Wales and the Repulse in 57 and 67 metres of water, probably salvaged by a guy with a hose pipe stuffed in his mouth, some homemade goggles and bits of plywood on his feet. Obviously he's taking down ropes and stuff, and they're blowing bits of the ship off and then lifting it out, but it shows the impact of salvaging, and they are war graves. They're not supposed to be touched, but unfortunately they've gone. So if you want to dive a King George V battleship, the Audacious, I think, is the only diveable one left in the world, which is nice for us. It's close, but bad that those have been salvaged. So anchor on the Justicia, and that's the shot I was trying to get. So that's you've got the lights off the camera to the side, and then two divers picking out some interesting bits of the wreck, and then you can see the Titanic railings there at the top. So it's just too corny to go and stand on there. But I mean it's just a fantastic sight underwater, sort of ghostly, lying there on the bottom in blue water, and of course the cameras are quite light sensitive now, so you don't need a huge amount of light to pick out the details, but that's at 70 metres, so it's quite a nice thing to be able to see. So we've seen the pointy bit, there's the spinny thing, that's one of the props from the Justicia, and again vast props for pushing these things through the water. But again, you see that a lot of the superstructure that was around the propellers sort of collapsed almost flat on the bottom, the props that are lying there on the bottom. And if you're into your maritime architecture, you can see the prop shaft and then the drive shafts from the engine, triple expansion things. You can see the different sizes of the triple expansion, each chamber, because obviously as the steam comes out of the boiler, it's very high pressure, so you've got quite a small chamber for the first chamber, a small first chamber, the second chamber becomes bigger, and the third chamber is bigger still, because it's taking advantage of the drop in pressure, so you get more volume. So that's quite interesting to see, and it's quite interesting to be able to float around them, because obviously if you went to a dry museum, you could walk around, but you'd be looking up or looking down at stuff, whereas underwater you can really get a look sort of 3 dimensions, which is quite nice. Then we sort of look at some of the other less commonly dived. So this is on the Roscommon, which is in like 84 metres of water. Again, another vast passenger ship converted to the war efforts, and what they do is they put a pea shooter on it to defend itself. So no wonder it's on the bottom. So you've got 100 Nazi U-boats sat there waiting, and you give them a 3-inch gun to try and defend themselves. So they don't have much luck of it, and usually these repurposed ships travel as part of a convoy, and there are frigates and destroyers alongside which can sort of fight back a little bit. But sometimes they get separated because of weather, or they just get picked off by the U-boats. So some fascinating naval strategy there, and thank goodness, like, none of us have had to go to war in this kind of situation. Like, having to go to sea,
Yes.
you know there's U-boats out there, right? Yes, exactly. Hopefully I'm too old to be drafted in, but you might be in the shit. So. But yeah, I mean, you know, it sort of would have been terrifying. People conscripted, stuck on these boats, and they're out at sea in vast, you know, swells, 3 or 5 metre swells, and they're just looking around, like, waiting for the inevitable, isn't it? So sort of quite harrowing. Again, I think this is the Vintner. This is quite an interesting ship. Not this bit of it, but the front. It has a clipper bow, so it's a steel ship with a bow like a clipper. So it's got a long, pointy bow. And I don't think I put a shot of it in there. I was tempted to say that's the clipper bow, but there's a dead giveaway. That's the wrong end of the ship. That's the Irish bow. You know, we've had that a couple of times where the skipper says, "Aye, lads, the bow's to the north. Go down, turn right." You turn right, and you end up at the propeller. So, one good thing about doing this a bit more seriously, you can see the scooters that these guys have got, and that can make diving 200-metre long wrecks like manageable. Instead of taking a whole dive to swim the length of the wreck, you end up being able to do it in about 5 minutes. So you can mess up, go to the wrong end, and still get to see the bit you wanted to. So, you know, more sort of vast stuff. Comedically called Squid Launcher. Which is it's on the Hurst Castle, again in about 80 metres, and there may or may not have been a lobster living in the middle one. I couldn't possibly comment on that. But yeah, that's one way to get the Chinese guys to stay still in one place. Like, they see a couple of antennae around, just, oh brilliant, he's going to be here for a few minutes, I can take a shot. But in Portsmouth there's actually one of these on display, and painted in sort of grey, but you can see the condition of this after being on the bottom for like 70 years, and it almost looks like you could haul it up, scrape off the barnacles, give it a coat of paint, and it would be back into service. So squids were little torpedoes about that size, and I think they were used anti-sub or anti-mine, but you could basically throw through or fire through them into water, and they sort of go down and take out some of the smaller targets. So the Roscommon was quite a small boat, and we did this on one of like the rest days, so an 80-metre rest day. The reason it's a rest day is because it's quite a small ship. You can see around it in a 15-20 minutes, and 15-20 minutes at 80 metres is a lot less decompression than an hour at 70 metres, so that was quite nice. And then loads of super cool stuff to see, like this, and not dive very often, so the Chinese loved it, because there were lobsters everywhere, so they were really excited. And quite interestingly, they were sort of defining bottom times based on lobsters. Oh, what bottom time are you going to do today? 2 lobsters. Okay, about 20 minutes, no problem. Another less dive wreck, the Foil, you know, in about 50 metres, and the bow intact again, a lot smaller boat, and you can't really see it, but there's like the ripples on the bottom are almost like a metre deep, whereas at Branksome they'd be like 10 centimetres, so it gives you a clue of what the magnitude of the storm. The Foil again, just a little prop sticking out there at the back, and even like what we would consider quite a small wreck after the Giants that we've been diving at other times during the week, still a brilliant dive, and you can see the bottom is pebbles and the blueness of the water, and about 55 metres of water, this one. That is like the amazing shot. How deep do you think that is?
past the seal.
Yeah. 120 metres. Photobombed by a seal.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Just incredible.
Without scuba gear.
Yeah, exactly. And that is cold water coral as well, so that's quite scientifically important. So that's the Amazon. Again, one of these vast passenger liners repurposed to military jobs, military service. And yeah, that wreck, I just remember, it's 40 miles offshore, so you're pretty remote already in Malin Head, and then you're really remote 40 miles offshore. And we did quite a long dive, like 30 minutes bottom time. The second team only wanted to do one lobster, so like 10 minutes. 10 minutes at 120 metres is still quite a big dive. But we were up at about 35 metres doing some of our decompressions. They were finishing their bottom time. And although we couldn't see them individually, we could see the outline of the wreck, like just a big shadow, and we could see their lights like dancing around on the wreck as they were exploring it.
What
So-
are the currents like under there now?
Out there,
Yeah.
at 40 miles offshore, very little.
Oh, right.
Virtually none, because it's so far away from the land
Yeah.
that even though the water's moving, you don't feel it. When you come inshore, like the Laurentic, the first one that I showed, quite strong, like similar to down here. Out there, no need to worry about slack tides. Some of the closer in ones, you need to be a bit more careful. And all the diving's done from a lazy shot, so it means you come back to the shot line, come up the shot, the last person pulls the pin, and then everybody drifts together, which is a really fantastic way of diving, because if there's a problem, everybody's on hand to help. And problem, I think the most decompression we did was about 4 hours out there. So if you come to the surface, you're not bent, you're basically dead. You probably wouldn't make it to the surface before you died. So you need to sort the shit out before, otherwise it's game over, isn't it? But it's, well, I won't say it's perfectly safe, but you could get run over walking across the road, isn't it? And I'm no different to you guys, only that I've just gone in a slightly more involved direction, done a bit more practice and training, and moved in this direction. But this kind of stuff 20 years ago would have been like cutting edge, and now it's not routine, but there's a pathway there. You're not really finding your own way through this, and we do probably do a bit more bottom time than everybody else, but nonetheless we're not pushing it too much. But this Amazon, like, I think that's one of my best dives ever. And then having a seal, like, hello, what are you doing? Like, that's cool. And they're quite common out there. And interestingly, they're all big adults, as opposed to like the small playful ones. And it seems as if they're territorial. So you never see one of them, and they kind of like hang out. And we've been swimming like, oh fuck, there's a dead body, and it's like, whoa, a seal just been having a nap on the bottom. And they kind of like, whoa, what are you doing here? And then they swim off and they come back and they have a look and they try and mess up your photos by photobombing you. So that, I promise you, that really is happened. I didn't just like cut and paste a seal onto there. And it's like the old thing, hey, did you see the manta? Yeah, fuck off, no one saw the manta. So I'm saying to these two guys, oh, did you see that seal? That was incredible. Like, yeah, whatever, wanker, like, shut up. And then you're like, look, no, can't believe we missed it. But they're too busy being cool and hanging out and enjoying the dive, isn't it? Again, another pea shooter, put in a 180 metre long wreck, give it a 2.5-inch gun, and of course a U-boat comes after it. There's only one thing that happens, and that it ends up on the bottom, and you can sort of see a little bit of scale there with the diver. It does look quite impressive as a gun, and that is in about 120 metres, but it's not impressive compared to the length of the boat and the target it would have been for the U-boats. And then I think this is my last, the last one. So you're probably bored of hearing me talk, but this is the Transylvania, and that's in about 147, that anchor. So Lee said that's the best dive in the British Isles. I don't think it is. I think the Amazon is better, which is like 30 metres shallower or something like that. But that could have been just because of the day we did it on. We still had like 50, 60 metres of visibility, but it was overcast on that day. So you get down to that depth and you notice the water's gone very dark. Of course, there's, even in crystal clear visibility, the light is attenuated by the water. So even in the clearest tropical water, it gets dark at 200 metres, even in midday sun. So that's sort of an indication of the lack of sunlight on that day. It felt dark and overcast. This one has been salvaged somewhat, so a lot of the superstructure has been taken. So it's kind of like, well, it's on its side, but a lot of the superstructure has been taken off. So you feel like the damage, and it doesn't feel like there's a story to the damage. When you go to the Audacious and you can see bits of metal bent and, you know, the impact of the explosion, it's quite a different experience to something that's been salvaged. But even so, a brilliant wreck, and the scooters and the visibility really helping. So at 150 metres, you imagine the shop lines doing that, the wreck's here on the bottom, we're at the bow, taking a picture of the anchor, and we can see the strobes on the line at 90 metres, 60 metres above us. And instead of coming all the way back along the bottom and building up another hour and a half of decompression, we can scooter directly from the bow up to the shop line in about 90 metres, saving, like I said, an hour and a half of decompression, which is pretty nice, as I would say. But I mean, we're carrying enough gas, and there's enough gas around that if someone had a problem, we can get out on open circuit. But even so, you sort of get back to the line, you're up at about 50, 60 metres, you're kind of doing a mental calculation. It's like, right, I'm absolutely sure if something went wrong now, I can solve it myself. Whereas you kind of like a little bit of a, yeah, if, well, I might be able to do it, and then we do this. But yeah, it's like pretty cool diving, I would say. So I think that's my last, it is. So thank you for your attention. And if you had any questions or anything.
If you made it this far, thank you. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to smash that like button, and you can subscribe, comment, and share it to all your friends who might also be interested. Thank you.